So George Bailey will have to have some statistics on his customers, whether they have jobs or not, how much they make, can they afford the mortgage, blah, blah, blah. But he also is going to know his customers. It's an important part of mortgage banking in the old way it was done. He knows their character. He knows a lot about them. George Bailey could mobilize, and did, both algorithmic knowledge and experiential knowledge in making loan decisions. Now, there's one problem of lending that, as far as I remember from George Bailey's in It's a Wonderful Life, there weren't many blacks and there weren't many Latinos in that community. There was no redlining in that community. Redlining, as everybody knows what that is. It's a practice that banks used to make. It's against the law now. They used to mark off whole portions of a city as where they would not lend, generally areas that were black ghettos or other minority groups. It's always poor areas. And it was you can say it combined two things. One, there was a certain amount of elemental racism in it. After all, the bankers were part of a community, and racism was endemic in our communities. But it was also market signaling. This was a convenient way of knowing one's customer, in quote. It was a lot easier than actually knowing your customer to just say, well, well, you know the story. It's the same story as racial profiling, and that has, both elements in it. There are no more George Baileys. There are no more community banks that make significant amounts of loans to customers. We now have to mortgage lending. We now have securitization. What is quickly securitization? It transforms loans into bonds. And it does this by pooling a variety of loans so as to get rid of idiosyncratic risk, to get rid of the necessity of knowing one's customer in the way that George Bailey knows one's customer. It's a way of 2 minutes, okay. It's a way of transforming the borrower from a real person into a set of statistics that can then be processed algorithmically. The idea behind it was to bring in more capital, particularly into rural areas, which it did, and the evidence for that is that the spread between borrowing rates in rural areas and borrowing rates, mortgage rates in urban areas got much narrower after securitization, or even into small towns where there was more shortage of capital. And it did this, the theory was, and the practice, by the ability of securitization to eliminate, or well, not to eliminate, but to make one form of risk irrelevant by being able to apply the law of large numbers. So yes, you might default on your loan because you lose your job and you can't pay, but if I have enough people and the risks are independent, then that just becomes a cost of doing business. I can apply a probability calculus to it and factor that in to the returns on the bond. What does this have to do with redlining? Well, one of the purposes, not the main purpose, but one of the purposes that was accomplished was to get rid of redlining because the investor who bought the bonds neither cared nor knew whether the ultimate borrower was white, black, or purple. It also became illegal to include that fact on the mortgage application, except to identify positively for purposes of affirmative action. it also changes the incentives for the George Baileys of the world. So, George Bailey's still involved, but he's involved as what's called a loan originator. He goes out and identifies potential customers, and he gets his pay right up front. He's paid a certain fee for originating the loan and putting it together with other, making it available to be put together with other loans to be packaged into these securities. George Bailey, good guy that he is, no longer has the same incentive to know his customer that he had before because he's not holding that loan to maturity. He's got rid of that loan even before the ink is dry on his signature. So George Bailey's incentives are rather different now. His incentives are to make as many loans as he can. Whether, again, and this does change something, whether to white, black, or purple people, whether to people who can pay their loans or can't pay their loans, he's out of it, as I say, even before the ink is dry. Is there an alternative? Well, we can see that, and I don't want to simplify, it was never conceived as simply a way of dealing with redlining, though Republicans and Democrats alike did embrace the idea of extending home ownership to minority communities. And securitization was a means to do that. But if you think about it, it was an end run around the problem of redlining and the problem of prejudice that redlining reflects. And it was a project in the small, project of emancipation that had within it, as we can well see now, the seeds of a project of great oppression and domination. Is there an alternative? Well, the alternative, you can see where I'm going with this, would be to embed the bank in the community and to give the community some real stake in the bank and to face the problems of prejudice head on. The closest model that exists to this is the microfinance model, pioneered by the Grameen Bank, Mohammed Yunus, who got, interestingly enough, the Nobel Peace Prize for it, but not the Nobel Prize in economics, as the one innovator who actually did something in the sphere of economics is totally off bounds. He was never even considered for a moment that he might get the prize in economics for having actually made an important economic innovation. The Grameen Bank, microfinance, emphasizes a key aspect of community, namely that members of the community co-sign for each other, are mutually responsible for each other's loans. But cuts both ways, like every project of emancipation. Because what this does, it can cement community, it can also be divisive. Because when people are self-selected, the most responsible people in the community are going to select other people like them as co-signers, the weakest members for whatever reasons, and there are many reasons other than being irresponsible why you might be marginal in terms of your ability to repay, you're going to be left, you're going to have a much more difficult problem. The biggest problem, of course, is the problem of scale. Microfinance is what it says, microfinance, very small loans. Mortgage loans are, for everybody, very big loans. Are there nevertheless lessons that could be drawn from the experience of microfinance, from the embedding of the bank in the community that would be applicable as we search for new alternatives? I'll close with that question.